What if the person you are becoming is already inside you, waiting not for permission, but for courage? What if your beginning does not have to define your ending? What if the place you came from, the limits around you, the doubts spoken over you, and the fears within you are not the final word about your life? And what if becoming is not about turning into somebody else, but finally growing into the person you were always meant to be? Welcome to this audiobook, Insights of Becoming by Michelle Obama. Before we begin, if you enjoy deep insights from the world's most powerful books on growth, leadership, purpose, and personal transformation, subscribe to Success Resources Books Insights. This channel is dedicated to helping you extract wisdom from life-changing books and turn those lessons into practical action for your own life. Now, before we step into the story itself, let us take a moment to understand the woman behind the pages. Michelle Obama is a lawyer, writer, leader, former First Lady of the United States, and one of the most admired women in the world. But long before she stood on global stages, she was a little girl growing up in a small apartment on the south side of Chicago. Her story is not powerful because it is glamorous. It is powerful because it is human. It is a story of family, discipline, disappointment, identity, hard work, self-doubt, resilience, and grace. In Becoming, Michelle Obama does not simply tell us what happened in her life. She opens a window into how a person is formed. She reminds us that greatness is rarely built in grand moments first. It is usually built quietly, in living rooms, in family habits, in difficult decisions, in the way we respond when life does not immediately reward our effort. This is why Becoming resonates so deeply. It is not merely a memoir, it is a mirror. It asks every listener a deeper question. Who are you becoming? And with that, let us begin where every becoming begins. At home. Michelle Obama begins her story not in a palace, not in the White House, not on a campaign stage, but in a modest apartment on Euclid Avenue in Chicago. This matters. Because one of the first lessons of becoming is this: your life does not need to begin in abundance to be rich in value. Michelle grew up in a working-class family. Her father, Fraser Robinson, worked at the city water plant. Her mother, Marion Robinson, stayed deeply involved in raising Michelle and her older brother, Craig. They did not live extravagantly. They lived carefully. They lived honestly. They lived with dignity. Their home was small, space was limited, comfort was modest, but the atmosphere of the home carried something many larger homes lack: stability, love, order, and belief. This is one of the quiet strengths of Michelle Obama's story. She shows us that success is not always born from excess. Very often, it is born from structure. There was discipline in that home. There was expectation in that home. There was care in that home. Michelle was taught to do well, not because someone was trying to impress the world, but because excellence was simply part of how the family lived. And this is a powerful reflection for all of us. Many people are waiting for perfect conditions before they begin to grow. But Michelle's story teaches the opposite. You can build confidence in a small place. You can build character before you build wealth. You can build discipline long before you build influence. Think about how often the world tells us that success begins with access. Better schools, better networks, better opportunities, better timing, better privilege. But Becoming starts by showing us another truth. Success may be helped by access, but it is often anchored by values. Michelle watched her father wake up and go to work consistently, even while dealing with multiple sclerosis. Imagine the impression that leaves on a child. Not just words about perseverance, a living example of it. He kept going. He kept showing up. He kept providing. He kept moving with dignity. That kind of example teaches something books alone cannot teach. It teaches that strength is not loud. Sometimes strength is simply faithfulness. And her mother brought another kind of strength into the home: quiet wisdom, emotional steadiness, presence, careful observation, a kind of intelligence that did not need to shout to be powerful. Together, her parents gave Michelle something priceless, a sense that she mattered, and a standard that she must rise. That combination is life-changing, because affirmation without standards can create fragility. And standards without affirmation can create insecurity. But when you receive both, you begin to grow strong. This chapter asks us to reflect on our own beginnings. What did your home teach you about work? What did your home teach you about love? What did your home teach you about what was possible for your life? And perhaps even more importantly, what are you teaching now through the way you live? Because whether we realize it or not, somebody is learning from our daily example. Michelle's early life reminds us that becoming often starts in ordinary rooms, with ordinary people, living extraordinary values. And from that home, from those early rhythms of discipline and care, a deeper question begins to rise in her life. Can a girl from here really go there? That question leads us into the next stage of her becoming. Michelle Obama was bright from a young age. She loved learning. She was observant, capable, competitive, and determined. She noticed things. She paid attention. She wanted to do well. But ambition in her story is not painted as vanity. It is painted as hunger. A hunger to grow. A hunger to prove. A hunger to become. This matters because many people misunderstand ambition. Some think ambition is arrogance. Some think ambition is pride. Some think wanting more means being ungrateful. But healthy ambition is not rebellion against where you came from. It is a response to the gifts and possibility within you. Michelle wanted to excel in school. She wanted to stretch herself. She wanted to rise beyond assumptions. And very early, she began to notice something that many high achievers eventually face. The world is not always set up to imagine greatness coming from people like you. That is a painful truth. And yet it is also a refining one. Because there comes a moment in many lives when outside expectations attempt to define inside potential. Someone underestimates you. Someone puts you in a smaller category. Someone implies that your dream is too ambitious. Someone quietly tells you, in tone or in words, to lower your aim. Michelle faced that, and instead of shrinking, she responded with effort. This is one of the most practical lessons in the book. Confidence is not always something you feel first. Often, confidence is something you build through preparation. You study. You show up. You work. You improve. You keep going. And slowly, your effort becomes evidence. Evidence that you belong. Evidence that you can grow. Evidence that you are more than the labels placed on you. There is a powerful lesson here for anyone listening today. Do not wait for universal approval before you pursue excellence. Some people will not understand your hunger until they see your results. Some people will not believe in your potential until your consistency makes it undeniable. Michelle's life shows that talent matters, yes, but discipline multiplies talent. Her ambition was shaped not just by desire, but by environment. She had parents who expected much from her. She had a brother who challenged and inspired her. She had teachers and mentors who noticed her ability. She had a competitive spirit that refused to settle. And that is important too. No one becomes alone. Even highly driven people are often strengthened by people who saw something in them early. Maybe it was a parent. Maybe it was a teacher. Maybe it was a coach. Maybe it was one voice that said, "You can." Never underestimate the power of one life-giving voice in a person's becoming. And yet, even with support, the journey is never simple. Because as Michelle keeps rising academically, she begins to face a new challenge. Not just whether she can succeed, but whether she belongs in rooms that were not built with her in mind. That tension becomes even sharper in the next chapter, as her world expands beyond her neighborhood. And she begins to walk into spaces where excellence alone does not erase discomfort. One of the most moving parts of becoming is the way Michelle Obama describes the tension of entering elite spaces. She earns her way in. She proves herself. She performs well. And still, she feels the quiet friction of not fully belonging. This is a deeply human experience, and not only about race or class, though those are real and central in her story. It is also about any moment in life when you enter a room you worked hard to access, only to discover that access is not the same as ease. You may be invited in and still feel alone. You may be qualified and still feel questioned. You may be capable and still feel unseen. Michelle's story captures that emotional complexity so well. She is not simply fighting to get into better schools. She is learning how to hold on to herself inside environments that could subtly pressure her to become someone else. And this is one of the book's strongest insights. Growth is not only about opening doors. It is about keeping your identity when new doors open. That is harder than people think. Because often when we reach new levels, the temptation is to edit ourselves to fit in, to soften our truth, to hide our roots, to silence our instincts, to perform a version of ourselves that feels more acceptable. Michelle shows the cost of that pressure. She describes the discomfort of being one of the few, the awareness of difference, the burden of needing to be not just good, but exceptionally good, the sense that mistakes might be judged more harshly, the feeling that your presence might still feel surprising to others, even when you have earned your place. Many listeners will understand this immediately. Maybe you have felt it in business, maybe in leadership, maybe in a boardroom, maybe in a classroom, maybe in a family system, maybe in a new country, maybe in marriage, maybe in ministry, maybe in entrepreneurship. That inner tension of asking, do I have to become less of myself to survive here? Michelle's answer over time becomes no. Not because it is easy, but because becoming requires integrity. And integrity is not merely moral behavior. It is inner wholeness. It is the courage to remain connected to who you are while adapting, learning, and growing. This is where becoming moves beyond memoir and becomes a guide. Because all growth creates pressure, the question is whether pressure will distort you or deepen you. Michelle's life reminds us that discomfort is not always a sign you are in the wrong place. Sometimes it is proof that you are stretching into new territory. The key is not to run back every time you feel unfamiliarity. The key is to grow roots deep enough that unfamiliar spaces do not uproot you. That kind of rootedness comes from memory. Remembering where you came from. Remembering what formed you. Remembering what matters. Remembering the people whose sacrifices helped build your path. And as Michelle's path leads her toward Princeton, we begin to see a young woman doing exactly that, carrying her home within her, while stepping into a world far bigger than the one she had known. Leaving home changes people. Sometimes it frees them. Sometimes it frightens them. Sometimes it reveals what they were leaning on without knowing it. For Michelle Obama, Princeton was not just a prestigious university. It was a proving ground, a place where intellect, Identity, class, race, insecurity, and ambition all met each other head-on. Imagine the emotional layers of that experience. A young Black woman from the South Side of Chicago, brilliant, disciplined, prepared, walking into one of the most elite institutions in the world. This is not just a story about academics. It is a story about psychological transition. Because one of the hardest parts of growth is not the new opportunity itself. It is the internal adjustment required to live inside it. Michelle arrives with talent, but talent does not remove tension. She still must navigate what it means to be far from home, to see wealth up close, to encounter classmates from backgrounds very different from hers, to feel at times both accomplished and disoriented. And yet, this is where her becoming deepens. Because Princeton forces her not only to succeed outwardly, but to ask inwardly, who am I when I am not surrounded by the familiar? What do I actually believe? What do I want? How do I define success? Those questions matter. Many people spend years pursuing achievement without ever pausing to define what success means to them personally. They inherit definitions from parents, culture, fear, comparison, prestige, or social pressure. Michelle's story reminds us that achievement without inner clarity can still leave you unsettled. At Princeton, she learns, observes, wrestles, and matures. She becomes more aware of systems, more aware of inequality, more aware of the emotional labor required to move through elite institutions while carrying the weight of representation. That last part is important. There is a hidden burden many pioneers carry. It is not enough to do well. They often feel they are carrying the hopes, dignity, or visibility of others like them. That burden can be tiring, but it can also be sacred. Michelle learns to carry it with thoughtfulness. She also learns that intelligence comes in many forms. Not all wisdom comes in polished packaging. Not all value comes from elite pedigree. And not all success should be measured by institutional approval. This is a lesson that becomes more important as she moves further in life. Because sooner or later, every driven person faces a crossroads. Will I live for external prestige or for internal alignment? At this stage, Michelle is still achieving, still climbing, still proving. But beneath the surface, deeper questions are forming. Questions that will matter more and more. The beauty of this chapter is that it shows growth as both exciting and costly. Opportunity opens up, but innocence falls away. New worlds appear, but simplicity disappears. Achievement comes, but so do harder questions. That is real life. You do not become by collecting victories only. You become by allowing new experiences to refine your understanding of who you are. And once Princeton stretches her vision, Harvard will continue that journey. But more importantly, the world beyond school will force her to confront something many ambitious people eventually face. What happens when the life you worked so hard for does not fully satisfy your soul? That is where the next stage of becoming begins. Before we continue, if this audiobook insight is speaking to you, subscribe to Success Resources Books Insights and share this with someone who is in a season of growth, transition, or rediscovery. Because books like Becoming do more than tell stories. They help us find language for our own journey. And sometimes one insight, one reflection, one chapter at the right moment can shift how a person sees their life. Now let us continue. From Princeton, Michelle Obama moves forward to Harvard Law School. On paper, this is the kind of path many people admire instantly. Smart girl, top schools, elite credentials, clear upward movement. This is the kind of biography the world often applauds. And yet, Becoming invites us to look beneath applause. Because success is not only about where you arrive, it is also about what you discover once you get there. Michelle continues excelling. She continues moving through prestigious spaces. She continues building a future many would call impressive. But within this movement, something important is happening. She is learning that being accomplished is not the same as being fulfilled. That is a lesson many people learn far too late. The world teaches us to chase what looks successful first. Title, recognition, status, salary, image, approval. But eventually, the deeper questions arrive. Does this life fit who I am? Does this work mean something to me? Am I becoming more alive? Or merely more decorated? Michelle's story becomes especially powerful here because she does not present herself as someone who had every answer early. She is thoughtful, capable, driven, but still human. Still figuring things out. Still discovering that the path that looks right from the outside may not feel right on the inside. That honesty is refreshing. Because many memoirs are written as though greatness was always obvious. Becoming does not do that. It shows uncertainty. It shows discomfort. It shows the slow unfolding of self-knowledge. And self-knowledge is one of the greatest forms of wealth a person can possess. Why? Because without self-knowledge, you can build a life that others admire, but you do not truly love. Michelle begins to sense that she wants more than professional success. She wants meaning. She wants contribution. She wants work that connects with people and purpose. She wants alignment, not just advancement. This is a critical turning point, and it is one that many listeners may need to hear. There is nothing wrong with achievement. There is nothing wrong with ambition. There is nothing wrong with wanting to do well. But if success pulls you away from your values, your joy, your voice, or your sense of service, then eventually the soul starts asking for more. And when the soul starts asking, wisdom says, listen. Michelle's life gives permission for that. Permission to question the script. Permission to reevaluate the dream. Permission to admit that what looked impressive may not be enough. Permission to redefine success not as status, but as significance. This chapter invites us to ask a hard but necessary question. Am I chasing the right things? Not the shiny things? Not the socially rewarded things? Not the comparison-driven things? The right things? And often, the answer to that question does not come in a moment of triumph. It comes in a quiet moment of unrest. Michelle's unrest becomes part of her becoming, and that is such a helpful truth. Confusion is not always failure. Sometimes confusion is transition. Sometimes dissatisfaction is invitation. Sometimes the life that no longer fits is making room for the life that will. And as Michelle steps into professional life, carrying success on paper but questions in her heart, she is moving toward one of the most human discoveries in the entire book. You can do everything right and still need to reimagine your life. One of the most valuable things about becoming is that Michelle Obama does not glamorize the climb. She tells the truth about its emotional texture. She works hard. She achieves. She enters respected professional spaces. And yet, there remains a gap between accomplishment and calling. That gap is where many people live. From the outside, life looks impressive. From the inside, something feels incomplete. There may be gratitude, but not joy. Progress, but not peace. Security, but not deep meaning. Michelle's reflections help listeners understand that this tension is not weakness. It is awareness. Awareness that your soul has needs beyond performance. Awareness that identity cannot be sustained by trophies alone. Awareness that calling is often discovered not through image, but through honest discontent. This part of her journey is deeply relevant today because we live in a world that rewards optics. People are often praised for how their life appears before they have had time to ask whether their life is truly aligned. Michelle offers a more grounded model. She pays attention to herself. She notices what energizes her and what drains her. She begins to distinguish between prestige and purpose. That distinction changes lives. Prestige asks, "How will this make me look?" Purpose asks, "How will this allow me to serve?" Prestige is hungry for validation. Purpose is rooted in contribution. Prestige often impresses others. Purpose often transforms others. Michelle's life does not reject excellence. It reorders it. Excellence becomes a tool, not an idol. Success becomes a platform, not a master. Opportunity becomes meaningful when tied to service. And that is where becoming becomes not only inspirational, but deeply practical. Because it challenges listeners to examine their own lives. Where have you been successful but empty? Where have you been admired but disconnected from yourself? Where have you outgrown a definition of success that no longer fits? These are not easy questions, but they are liberating ones. Because becoming requires courage. Not only the courage to begin, but the courage to adjust. Michelle shows us that it is possible to be highly competent and still evolving. Highly accomplished and still searching. Highly respected and still becoming. That should encourage anyone who feels unfinished. You do not have to have your entire life figured out to be on the right path. You do not have to eliminate all uncertainty before moving toward greater alignment. Sometimes the next step is not built on certainty. It is built on honesty. And honesty says, "This matters to me. This does not. This fits. This doesn't. This is success by the world's standards. But this is life by mine." That kind of honesty prepares Michelle for the next major movements in her life. New relationships, new choices, new definitions, new responsibilities. But before those chapters unfold, Part 1 leaves us with the most important foundation of all. Before Michelle Obama became a global figure, she became a grounded woman. And grounded people can carry weight. As we close this first part of becoming, it is worth pausing to gather the deeper lessons from Michelle Obama's early years. Her story teaches us that where you start matters, but it does not imprison you. It teaches us that family values, even in modest surroundings, can create extraordinary internal wealth. It teaches us that ambition can be healthy when rooted in discipline and dignity. It teaches us that excellence is often forged quietly, long before the world notices. It teaches us that entering bigger rooms does not mean abandoning your roots. It teaches us that discomfort in new spaces is not proof that you do not belong. Often, it is simply part of growth. It teaches us that achievement alone is not enough. You must also ask what kind of life you are building, and why. And perhaps most of all, Michelle's early becoming teaches us this. You are allowed to evolve. You are allowed to keep learning yourself. You are allowed to change your definition of success. You are allowed to honor your beginnings without being limited by them. You are allowed to pursue excellence without losing your humanity. You are allowed to become. For the listener today, that may be the invitation of this entire book. Not to compare your life with Michelle Obama's, but to look at your own story with new respect. Maybe your beginning was humble. Maybe your confidence was built slowly. Maybe you have felt underestimated. Maybe you have entered spaces where you questioned whether you belonged. Maybe you have chased goals only to discover they were not enough. Maybe you are in a season of redefining what success really means. Then this book is for you. Because becoming is not reserved for the famous. It is the journey of every human being willing to live awake. And that is what makes Michelle Obama's story so powerful. It is deeply personal, yet universally recognizable. Her details are hers, but her questions belong to all of us. Who am I? What shaped me? What do I value? What am I pursuing? What does success mean to me? Who am I becoming? Those questions carry us forward. And in part 2, they will lead us into the next chapter of Michelle's life. Career, relationships, partnership, and the challenge of building not only a successful future, but a meaningful, shared life. If this first part of becoming encouraged you, stay with us for the next part of this audiobook Insights series. And subscribe to Success Resources Books Insights for more powerful lessons from the world's most meaningful books on purpose, leadership, growth, and transformation. Because your story is still being written, your identity is still unfolding, your voice is still growing stronger, and the person you are becoming may be far greater than the person you once imagined. This is Becoming, narrated by SR Books Insights. This is more than mindset, it's a mission. Keep seeking, keep growing, keep giving. And together, let's make the world rich again.